What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at how Real Madrid knocked Chelsea out of the Champions League, and now they will enter the semifinals. Now, before we get into tactics, this match is brought to you by OneFootball. It's the best app out there to stay up to date with the latest games, your favorite teams, and the biggest leagues all around the world. It's the app I use to get all the latest news and stay up to date with things like lineups and all the important news surrounding the biggest matches. So it's a great tool, and it's a great app to have for any football fan, any football coach, or anyone remotely interested in the biggest leagues around the world. That's me to your screen, just scrolling through the app, and there is a free download. There's a link in the description below, so be sure to check that out. And while you're in the description, check out both my books. They're in there as well. There's links to them, and check out Keyframe. It's how I make all these videos. Now let's get right into the tactics of the match. Now we're going to start with Chelsea's early pressing phase. And here we go with the two strikers of Timo Werner and Kai Havertz. Now they played this way in the defensive phase. And then behind them, we have Ruben Loftus-Cheek, N'Golo Kante, and Mason Mount here. Now, Kovacic would then be positioned deeper with then a back four behind them. So early stages, it was a 4-1-3-2 press, but this would often change through different moments of the match. And what we would see from the two forwards is pressing from out to in. And even their pressing tendencies and the use of man orientation by N'Golo Kante and Mason Mount, this too would change throughout the match. So this is just one early example of how Chelsea approached their pressing phase and tried to press Real Madrid. Real Madrid built from the back as they usually do, with Courtois splitting their two central defenders and going with wider fullbacks. One just off our screen here to the right, and then here we have Toni Kroos playing in a bit more central role, coming deeper and allowing Casemiro to stay higher to manipulate the press and the man orientation from the Chelsea players, which is why we see this 4-1-3-2 shape and why we see so much change because of the movement and manipulation Real Madrid use of the Chelsea players. So then this allows Valverde and Luka Modric to position themselves higher up the field. Now if we stick with Real Madrid in possession of the ball and move to their midfield third, we see a bit of asymmetry in their back line with some of our defenders just off our screen, and the backline asymmetry often came about through Valverde on the right, inverting, and then with Carvajal later in the game taking more of a central defense role, and with their mobility and fluidity to switch from a back four to a back five in and out of possession of the ball. But their whole offensive structure is set around the fluidity of the midfielder. So we have Toni Kroos with his tendency to drop in the left half space, and having Modric and Casemiro alongside Toni Kroos allows them to interchange which player comes deeper to then affect the game in a deeper area, with Valverde also coming in and inverting off the right hand side, overloading the middle, and actually giving them strong mutual help space in terms of passing options through the center areas of the field. And oftentimes when they play out of pressure, I don't think it's necessarily because they have a great offensive positional play structure, but it's more their individual movements, that their dismarking strategies on an individual level are superior to many of the teams they play against. Now for Chelsea, we also see a bit of fluidity from them as well, moving to a back four out of possession to then, after they get a 2-0 lead, they move to a back three or back five out of possession of the ball to then shore up some transitions and to have more control when Real Madrid were in possession. So now in this instance, we see a midfield diamond with Kante coming deeper as the single pivot in this situation, and Kovacic being drawn out by Valverde. And with Modric, Casemiro, and Kroos playing with a lot of fluidity, it changes the defensive structure from Chelsea a lot with aspects of man orientation that makes it a little bit unpredictable. But to start off the match, we do see Havertz and Timo Werner looking to block the half spaces or the wide areas using their cover shadows and not allow Real Madrid players to affect the game through central areas. Now we see later in the match, Real Madrid in possession moving into the final third of the field against Chelsea's low block or mid to low block in this situation. And we see now it's the 73rd minute, 2-0 lead, and we see Chelsea move into a 5-2-3 or a 5-4-1. And this is a sensible change from Thomas Tuchel because this is very similar to how they normally play with 3 central defenders, and having a 5-4-1 or 5-2-3 in a low block shores up their defensive coverage and makes it very hard for them to play and get broken down against from the Real Madrid perspective. And we see Real Madrid using a tactic they often do, tactic of an overload and isolate. So they have a lot of these small positional structures, rondo structures, 4-man movements, using the height and width of other players to create space. And this forces Chelsea to play in a very narrow way and concede space on the weak side through players like Carvajal and Rodrigo when he comes on the field, and ultimately scores the goal. But this overload and flexibility from the Real Madrid midfielders makes it very hard to play against and defend against, and especially with a 5-4-1, a very compact 5-4-1 can then lead to them being broken in different areas, especially with fast circulation from players like Toni Kroos and Luka Modric, who possess these capabilities. Now, when Real Madrid were able to progress in dangerous areas, like through players like Luka Modric, as we see here, was often because of failures in Chelsea's defensive phase. As we see here now earlier in the match, Ruben Loftus-Cheek dropping deeper to compensate the run of Mendy and Vinicius Jr., their partnership and wide rotation in the final third, and then narrow the back line of Chelsea and force them into a back 5. And again, this is what we talk about on situational responses to how Real Madrid play in a very fluid way. So we have Toni Kroos on the ball here and Luka Modric ahead of the ball. Toni Kroos drops between central defenders. As we see here, David Alaba in line with Toni Kroos with Nacho deeper. But from here we have Kovacic and Conte playing as the 2 holding midfielders, with Conte jumping out into an area where he's not supposed to and being attracted by Toni Kroos and not seeing the reference points of Luka Modric in the sense that he's supposed to be pinned and control the space between the line through the half space, and allow for then the front 3 to take the responsibility of pressuring Toni Kroos when he does drop into this first line. So by doing so, Conte jumps and then makes the defensive shifting error, doesn't listen to general principles out of possession, and concedes this dangerous space, which leads to a big chance between the lines and going into Chelsea's final third early on in the match. Now, Chelsea's build-up remained relatively consistent to how the rest of their match went. And this was probably because of Mendy's role and not being very active in the build-up. But here we see an asymmetric back 4 with Reece James coming deeper and the 2 central defenders being split, Thiago Silva going next to Mendy and Rudiger entering the wide area. Then we have our double pivot of Conte and Kovacic occupying central areas to control over transitions, and now Reece James in his wing-back position in his new role within the team, occupying with Marcos Alonso doing the same on the weak side. Now for Real Madrid, we'll see how they press differently throughout the match and especially as the match moves on. So we have their front 3 in what would then go into a 4-1-4-1. And our 2 midfielders, Casemiro and Toni Kroos, protecting the press and covering the cover shadows and covering the players in the first line of Real Madrid. Now here we see the wide players of Real Madrid's press from out to in and try and use positional superiority. That's important for this next clip that we'll see, in the sense that they press in a very different way. So now in the second half, we see them stick to more of their 4-1-4-1 shape with man orientation principles and with not a lot of levels of compactness due to the fact that they use heavy man orientation in this press in the second half. They have Modric coming wide to Marcos Alonso and not pressing from out to in anymore. It then creates possibilities for Chelsea to then exploit the space in behind this first and second line of pressure from Real Madrid, and especially if their double pivot movements had a vertical nature that allowed them to find progressive passes. But because of their deep double pivot, the space between the lines was allowed to then be created and have attacking players drop into deeper areas and ignite a third man movement. Now, in possession of the ball, we see the asymmetry within this Chelsea team. Now, with Ruben Loftus-Cheek and Reece James on one side, they have two players with their base positions that offers the team flexibility when in possession. So Ruben Loftus-Cheek playing as a wingback or wide midfielder throughout the match, and Reece James playing as a fullback. This allows then the double pivot to have more movements, staggering themselves with the central defenders, and use the half spaces in a more flexible and unpredictable way, which makes it harder to defend against. Then also it allows them to just commit two central defenders, two holding midfielders to the buildup, and allows them to have more creativity and more versatility going forward. So we have Mason Mount, Kai Havertz, Timo Werner, and these type of players between the lines with Hakim Ziyech coming into the game. And here we see a typical movement from Chelsea with then Marcos Alonso inverting, allowing for then Timo Werner to fan out into the wide area and create isolation with himself. This is all being done against the Real Madrid 4-1-4-1, with then Valverde showing his movement to then have his natural tendency to come deeper and play more as a wingback in deeper areas to track the movement of Marcos Alonso going higher up the field and inverting to then allow the winger to then create isolation on the wing. So Valverde would be the player who would then have to drop deeper to compensate this distance created by the winger. And Chelsea would look to overload the holding midfielder Casemiro by going with two attacking midfielders in most situations and have this be a staple throughout their offensive structure. So here we see their offensive structure in a very good perspective, with Reece James playing in this deeper role, playing almost as a third central defender, allowing for then Rudiger to play in a wider area and play closer to Marcos Alonso. Then we still have our four-man midfield with two holding midfielders and consistent access between the lines, with a player like Timo Werner or Kai Havertz running off the shoulders of the defenders, trying to create pinning and space between the lines. And we see the Real Madrid setup with their natural 4-1-4-1. But from here we can then even see on the right hand side, it's very easy for Chelsea to create dual width on one side and single width on another, with more versatility coming from Marcos Alonso to then invert to have these attacking players between the lines then fan out and find more space in the wide area. So ultimately, Real Madrid did enough and had enough individual moments and capitalizing on Chelsea's mistakes to then end up winning the two-legged tie and send them through to the semifinals. That's where we're going to wrap up the analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.